CGTN, China Global Television Network.
There was a group on this side, you can call them the left, or you've just called them the left, that came violently attacking the other group. So you can say what you want, but that's the way it is. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say.
The blame is on both sides. That was American President Donald Trump's final remark on the violence witnessed in various American states in recent weeks. Trump's response to the horrific scenes in Charlottesville, Virginia, have incurred global condemnation. The U.S. president's neutrality on white supremacists and neo-Nazis versus anti-racists has been interpreted by some as endorsing racism, xenophobia, and discrimination. So has America's age-old problem of racism reached the tipping point? And is America still the beacon of hope and diversity? I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. America's nationwide purge of Confederate statues has triggered protests in various parts of the country, most notably in Charlottesville, Virginia, where white supremacist groups defending the statues clashed with counter-protesters. Now, the ensuing deadly violence led to one death and dozens of casualties. And as President Donald Trump's young administration comes under criticism for its response on Charlottesville, there is growing concern over the state of the nation in light of these events. Toby Muse in Washington brings us the details.
Amazing grace.
A poignant moment for a country raw with emotion.
How sweet the sound.
A memorial service was held for Heather Heyer, the 32-year-old woman killed in Charlottesville, Virginia, after a car plowed into a crowd during a clash between white supremacists and counter-protesters. Heather's mother pleaded with the country to fight racist groups.
They tried to kill my child to shut her up. Well, guess what? You just magnified her.
The weekend violence centered on a statue of Robert E. Lee, a leading figure in the South's rebellion in America's Civil War 150 years ago. Far-right groups descended on Charlottesville to protest a plan to take down the monument. Fearing a repetition of similar confrontations, cities around the U.S. are removing their own Confederate statues. Baltimore took 4 down Tuesday night. There are an estimated 1,500 memorials scattered across the country. Many in the U.S. believe the chaos in Charlottesville was not helped by comments made shortly after by President Trump, who blamed both the white nationalists and the counter-protesters.
They came at each other with clubs, and it was vicious, and it was horrible, and it was a horrible thing to watch. But there is another side. There was a group on this side, you can call them the left, or you've just called them the left, that came violently attacking the other group.
Trump's remarks exposed the divisions across the country. They also split his own party. Former presidential candidate John McCain tweeted, "There's no moral equivalency between racists and Americans standing up to defy hate and bigotry. The President of the United States should say so." Critics of Trump say his recent outburst is just the latest in a line of racially charged comments, going back to when Trump announced he was running for president in 2015.
They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people.
In his first month as president, he announced he wanted to ban visitors from mainly Muslim countries. Trump has denounced neo-Nazis, yet the far right say it's emboldened under Trump's presidency. The president's words have revealed profound divisions in the country. Some of his supporters say that instead of unifying America, he is aggravating an already emotional issue. Toby Muse, CGTN, Washington.
And to help us unpack these developments in the United States and their significance globally, I'm now joined by my expert guests. In Philadelphia, Michael Jones, co-founder of the National Tea Party movement; Professor Ahmed Musavi, political science professor at the University of Tehran; in Johannesburg, Gareth Lepierre, professor at the University of Pretoria; and with me in studio, Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, a conflict resolution expert here in Nairobi. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining in on the program. Michael Jones, to you first in Philadelphia. I want to start off with President Donald Trump's, response to the incident in Charlottesville. And he did say, "We condemn the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides. I think there is blame on both sides," end quote. So there has been global outrage over that incident, but do you share the view that there are many sides to the issue of racism in the United States?
No, I think the president has issued a series of comments on the Charlottesville developments, the most unfortunate of which was, obviously the actual killing of one of the protesters. He's been very consistent in denouncing racism and violence of any sort. This, by the way, predates even the Charlottesville incident, going all the way back to his inaugural and even through the campaign, where he had called for racial unity in the country. And unfortunately, we're in a very politicized moment in the United States where the attachment of the allegation of racism is very understandably delegitimizing and stigmatizing, and I think probably ultimately improperly labeled here, because the initial comments that he made, where he specifically condemned them and called for an end, to bigotry, and then subsequently returned to Washington and issued a very pointed condemnation of it, were unambiguously critical of those actions. So the confusion that exists is only by those who I think want to be confused.
Right, Professor Lepierre.
Well, I think the Tea Party gentleman is somewhat disingenuous there, because as far as I'm concerned, Donald Trump really represents a visceral strain of racism, right from his campaign, the way he conducted his campaign against immigrants, against Mexicans, against Muslims, and now in the White House, he is exhibiting the same kind of divisive behavior, which really de facto smacks of racism. His comments 2 days after the Charlottesville incident is indicative of that. Why the equivocation? Why didn't he come out and condemn it outright? There are no many sides to this story. There's one side to the story, and that is it runs in the American tradition. To condemn racism, it is emblazoned in the American Constitution that all men there are equal, but the way that Donald Trump behaves is really smacks of racism.
Right. Professor Musavi, though Iran is one of those countries that is facing a Muslim ban from Donald Trump, do you share the sentiments from the two gentlemen?
Absolutely. I mean, there is absolutely no moral equivalency between people carrying torches and chanting neo-Nazi, white supremacist, racist slogans and the people trying to fight them. There is no confusion here. There's no many sides. There's the right side and there's the wrong side. And I think even Trump and his team understand this. Nevertheless, I think Donald Trump is trying to appeal to the white nationalist base that was very useful for him during the election campaign. I mean, he made a lot of racist comments in the election campaign, and that actually helped him in the election. So I think even the Trump team understands this, and they're just trying to create confusion. There's only the right side and the wrong side. Right,
Dr. Ali.
Because the challenge that is confronting the world today are two forms of extremisms. Extremisms, one that is perpetrated by groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, and the other extremism that is perpetrated by groups like those that we've seen marching on American streets, the neo-Nazis, white supremacists carrying swastikas. Swastikas are symbols of hate. And the problem here is that Trump has not come out very clearly to condemn those groups in the United States of America.
Michael Jones, the sentiment here is that Donald Trump is not doing much to condemn white supremacism in the United States. Your thoughts?
Yeah, unfortunately, I understand the fact that you may be a political opponent of President Trump, you may not support his political or public policy positions, but this was a complete, unambiguous condemnation of this on multiple occasions. The day of the incident, when he said specifically, we condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence. That was not perceived to be enough, and there may have been a point to that. At the time that those first comments were made, there was not a complete understanding of the nature of who was comprising all of those activities in Charlottesville. That subsequently became clear in the next few hours. He then actually returned to Washington, D.C., condemning those groups by name, all right? And so, and then again, as recently as in Phoenix, Arizona, in a speech, came out again condemning them. If you go back to his inauguration, he talked about the fact that, you know, all Americans, regardless of color, bleed the color of red, and that we need to unite, and our country and our policies need to be designed to address those issues. Unfortunately, and I really urge you to pause on this, the position of our border security, of concerns about immigration, which are very understandable and justifiable as it relates to concerns on terrorism and American employment and other very legitimate concerns, are more easily argued against if you're able to turn them into some allegation of racism. These are policy issues. They're not positions related to racism. And the president, it's a real distraction from the policy issues in front of the country to, I think, for the president and those affiliated with them to be continually having to reiterate this all over again. I mean, it's been stated again, and again.
Dr. Mustafa.
Yeah, Beatrice, what is going on in the United States of America and other places in Europe? You have a resurgence of far-right parties and movements and groups that are coming up, and they are feeding into each other's rhetorics. We didn't think that today, 21st century, we will actually see a return of those symbols of hate, like the swastikas that the neo-Nazis have been parading on the American streets. Now, the problem here is, Beatrice, is that there isn't much political will from some of these leaders who are extremist in nature, including the President of the United States of America, to deal with these issues. And when they don't deal with these issues, when they do not unequivocally condemn racism, this then becomes some kind of a tacit message to the white supremacists that it is okay for them to continue behaving in the manner that they have been behaving.
All right, gentlemen, it is quite an interesting debate. We'll continue shortly, and we are going to take a short break now. And when we come back, we'll look more into America's racial relations in a Trump era. To stay with us.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Talk Africa. Now, it's been over 2 decades since the fall of apartheid in South Africa, but even today, the Rainbow Nation still struggles with healing the wounds of a once racially segregated society. And as new findings put racial relations in the United States as being at their lowest in years, South Africans warn of the risks of letting racial tensions simmer in today's society. Yulisanja Mela now reports from South Africa.
It's been 23 years since the first multiracial national general elections in South Africa. But racism is still rife in this country, to an extent that government has now begun social cohesion dialogues, hoping to unify the nation. The ruling African National Congress is cautioning the U.S. to guard against letting the racial tensions simmer. The ANC says, based on the South African context, the party has learned the hard way that it takes decades to heal wounds from racial divisions.
As South Africans, we've got a history of a very racially divided society, a society that was based on hatred, on bigotry and prejudice. And so therefore we don't theorize around racial hatred and the damage that it can cause within a society. So we're calling on Americans and the leadership of America never to want to be neutral in such a situation. We must always take sides. We must always stand with those who want the universal principles of justice, of a common humanity.
Sangoni says US President Donald Trump would be best placed not to blame both sides of the divide or maintain neutrality on the matter.
As the ANC, we continue to believe that South Africa and indeed the world belongs to all who live in it, whether they are black or white. So we are hoping that there will be no space in society in general for any of such white supremacy acts as what we've seen in Charleston in the US. A position where you want to maintain neutrality and blame both sides is not assisting the problem. It is not addressing the issue that white supremacy must be defeated wherever it rears its head.
And many agree.
Honestly, it just makes me really sad because it's a nation that was supposed to be built on bringing people from all over the world. I mean, it says it on the base of the Statue of Liberty to send me you're hungry and you're destitute and all of that. I think that Trump is basically encouraging the situation by not saying that these people are wrong.
I just think racism is not correct at all. All people have same rights. I mean, color doesn't matter. At the end of the day, we should stand together. We shouldn't choose sides.
International Affairs Department wouldn't comment on this matter. Yolisa Njamela, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And I'm still joined by my expert guest in Philadelphia, Michael Jones, co-founder of the National Tea Party Movement, Professor Hamed Musavi, political science professor at the University of Tehran, in Johannesburg, Gareth Lepierre, professor at University of Pretoria, and with me in studio, Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, a conflict resolution expert. Dr. Lepierre, South Africa too has had its share of issues with the statue, Cecil Rhodes, Indira Gandhi's as well. Some of those statues were pulled down in South Africa. What exactly has been the impact of drowning or removing those statues in South Africa? What's been the symbolism of that?
Well, Beatrice, this was very controversial because, you know, the tearing down of those statues, which were actually, you know, remnants of South Africa's colonial past, was extremely controversial because this was done essentially by students who are very dissatisfied with the continued remnants of apartheid thinking in the South African body politic, but particularly with regard to how tertiary education was being conducted. But that symbolism, I think, was important to the extent, you know, that racism and racial behavior still runs very deep in the DNA of the society. And I think, you know, the analogy with the United States resonates quite deeply because there are still symbols of the old regime, the Confederate regime of the United States, for example, Robert E. Lee, which still evokes pretty negative perceptions as well as memories. So that symbolism, I think, is problematic in a society such as ours, and I would imagine in the United States, where racial division and racial hatred among particular segments of the society still runs very deep and still resonates quite deeply.
All right, Dr. Mustafa, is it more than just a symbol? Because in the Charlottesville incident, though, that was an organized protest against the removal of the Confederate statue of Robert E. Lee.
Yeah. Beatrice, it always has to be more than the symbols themselves. But that's where it starts, the symbolism that comes with the racism, hate and death that came, that some of those figures that have been memorialized by those statutes actually portend. The challenge is that history was written through the victor's eyes. And some of those people who have been memorialized by those statutes are kind of romanticized, even mythologized, as if they did something good. The truth of the matter is that they killed, they enslaved, they were white supremacists. And just having those statutes there represents hate, death, enslavement, and white supremacism. Now, it is another debate altogether to decide whether those statues should be removed or continue to stay. But what should be done for sure is to have those statues represent precisely and truly who those people were.
Right, Michael Holmes. President Trump has said this is they're trying to take away our culture, our history by removing the Confederate statues. Your thoughts?
Well, a few things here. Number one, the position of the president, my position as well, is that the decision on public memorials or statues is one that should be left to the locales that erected them. If they decide, which, by the way, it's so politically convenient that all of a sudden this has come up. It hasn't been addressed in decades here. It wasn't addressed during the Obama administration at all. All of a sudden there's a sense of urgency on it. But, you know, in many cases, communities in the United States have decided to either remove them, some have decided to keep them, some have decided to move them into more historic or museum situations so that they're not perceived as necessarily unequivocally praising these individuals, even though they are a core part of American history. Right. In some respects, if the importance is to remember American history, their presence there is important. Secondly, let me just say this: support or engagement, you know, in racism and slavery, whatnot, before 1860 is one thing. Afterwards, after 1860 is even more egregious. And we have throughout the United States Capitol and throughout the state of West Virginia memorials to the Democrat Robert Byrd, who was a Senate Majority Leader, who was a KKK recruiter. Right. No Democrat, no liberal has called for tearing these statues down. And this man was active politically in the United States as recently as 20 years ago. So for me, again, this is an issue of trying to politically seize a narrative and misrepresent the reality in the United States, which is much more complex and much more nuanced than has been presented, unfortunately, by the president's political opponents.
All right. Professor Musavi in Tehran, your thoughts?
I think the issue of taking down statues is not equivalent to erasing history. If that was the case, then Germany has erased history because they don't have statues of Hitler in their squares. But on the other hand, when you do put up the statue of a person, you're celebrating that person and you're celebrating the ideology of that person. So when you put up a statue of Abraham Lincoln, you're celebrating the ideology of Abraham Lincoln, who wanted to abolish slavery. On the other hand, when you put up statues of General Lee, you're actually celebrating the South's fight for keeping slavery in America. So I think the issue of having statues is a very complex issue, and I think it is actually it makes a lot of sense that the South has been taking down the statues of Confederate leaders in recent years. So I think that's the right move to do.
Right, so we've talked here about the symbolism of the statue, but importantly though, America, Dr. Mustafa, America has always been associated as a country of moral good, as a country of responsibility, and many on the African continent have often gone to America in search of a good life, in search of realizing their dreams. In light of what's coming out now from the United States, is America still a beacon of hope for many?
Yeah, to many and to a large extent, America still remains as a beacon of hope where there is democracy, there are freedoms that people can enjoy. That still continues. The challenge is that this has been stained, and I want to believe that is temporary. And that is temporary to the extent that the people who are parading themselves, who are parading the swastikas and other neo-Nazi symbols in the United States of America are few. In fact, they are less than 10% in the United States of America. Together with the sympathizers, maybe 30%, but that's a dangerously high number of people who actually believe in hate and racism. If that is not confronted, then that is going to grow, and it is upon the Americans to confront the racist behavior and hate language that is coming from a minority of the United States of America.
Professor Lapierre, in light of what's been coming out, is America still a beacon of hope?
Well, absolutely. You know, it is still, you know, is a metaphor for that shining city on the hill, to which all people try to aspire to, or at least, you know, to enjoy the kind of opportunities, because it is, after all, the opportunity society. The American dream was sort of predicated on bringing people together from all walks of life who are united in the values enshrined in the Constitution. You know, on a personal note, I'm a product of American universities. I spent 9 years of my life there, so I owe a great debt of gratitude, you know, to the kind of values, the kind of education, and the kind of exposure that I received in the United States. But that said, you know, I did detect in the United States, traveling through the Deep South, the sort of Jim Crow experience, which resonated quite strongly with my own experience in South Africa, that there are still huge segments of the American population that have not been integrated into that, you know, into that grand dream of opportunity. If you work hard, you know, that you will reach that shining city on the top of the hill. And I think this is part of the problem of Donald Trump, that he has not used the presidency as a unifying factor as his predecessors have from the time of Abraham Lincoln. The presidency has always been a unifying force, a force for good, and, you know, representative of all that is good in American society and all those values that are embedded in the American Constitution. If anything, Donald Trump is the antithesis of all those good things.
Professor Musavi, Iran, as I mentioned earlier, is one of on the list of President Trump's 6 banned countries here. Does America still represent a realization of dreams for Iranians?
Well, I can actually give you the majority view of both in Iran as well as the larger Middle East. The United States is not seen as a beacon of hope and liberty for some time now. I mean, the United States is seen as a supporter of Israeli occupation and Israeli crimes. Also, the invasion of Iraq led to a lot of instability in the Middle East and led to the creation of ISIS. So even before Donald Trump came into power, the United States was seen very negatively due to the very damaging foreign policy it has had in the Middle East. Now, when Trump came into power, this image of the United States has actually been magnified because Donald Trump has adopted very aggressive and very harsh policies, both towards Muslims and as well as towards Iran. I think it's very interesting that from the 6 Muslim countries that are named in the visa ban, not a single one of them, the citizens of those countries, have acted in any terrorist operation in the United States. So I think from the Middle East, it's seen that maybe Donald Trump and his administration is aggressive towards Muslims in general.
Right. Michael Jones, you have the final word on this. And based on the event from Charlottesville, do you think that America needs to restore its image on the globe?
I believe that there's no country held in higher esteem around the world than the United States of America, and for good reason. The promise for opportunity in this country is unmatched. I've been in all regions of the world. I've been throughout Africa as well. And there's also no confusion as to why people from all over the world want to come here. And that's because I think it's pretty broadly realized that those opportunities exist. We do have issues as it relates to, I concede, the issue of development in many of our urban areas, which predominantly have been run by the Democratic Party, not by Donald Trump's Republican Party, for decades. And those issues need to be tackled, and that means, you know, we need to make these areas job creating. They need to be, the educational systems need to improve. There needs to be a reduction of crime, and that means that these policies need to be looked at freshly and anew, and President Trump has been committed to doing that.
Right, gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights in Philadelphia. Michael Jones, co-founder of the National Tea Party movement. Professor Hamed Musavi, political science professor at the University of Tehran. In Johannesburg, Gareth Lepierre, professor at the University of Pretoria. And with me in studio, Dr. Mustafa Ali, conflict resolution expert. Thank you for joining us on the program. And remember, you can join the conversation online through Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And do tune in again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall. Goodbye.